Bible is one of the most misread, misquoted, and misunderstood books of all time. It's been used to justify countless wars and enslavement, along with the most inhumane treatment of people. I would even venture to say that the mainstream have mistranslated this sacred book for the sake of colonialism for centuries. There is a theory that has not been widely entertained in our generations, and that is the Hebrew theory of Africa. Many of us have dismissed the Bible because it doesn't appear to correlate with science. I believe that it does. Its beginnings cover many thousands, if not millions, of years. What have you been taught, and what are you willing to unlearn? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Period. The period is the hard stop in any sentence structure. So creation cannot be dated. Even more so, no one can really tell us how long man has been on this earth. Sure, there have been fossils found, and the oldest has been dated to 3 million years. But what does that prove? There are books that have hung all of our human existence on the finds and theory of Charles Darwin, and this theory of evolution has been mainstream for many years. There are still those of us who believe in creation, but because of many of the accounts in the Bible appearing to be unproven, it's a text that many of us deem as discredited. A lot of us believe that it's an Egyptian story that's been plagiarized. Truth is, no one really knows how far back the Bible story goes. But at least for the last 400 years, we've been taught that the biblical story involves a white man exclusively. No matter if you're classified as black, white, or whatever, you were taught to believe that the main characters or family of the Bible are white or olive skinned like the Arabians of today. But what if those characters resemble those of African descent, as many of the old artifacts depict? Would you view the story differently? Would you view the world differently? Maybe you will see that time is a continuation and that the Bible does have merit. There's a possibility that you will see the puzzle come together. Is there going to be pushback to this presented here? I'm sure. Anytime there's an attempt to change a person's mind, there's going to be rejection. But I hope this will cause you to study more, the way that learning of the First Nicene Council forced me to look further back in our history. No one knows the beginning but the Creator. Although we have been given a vantage point as a setup, maybe this Hebrew theory will begin a new way of thinking that will lead to a new dialogue and possibly a new perspective on life. As a point of reference, this in no way is saying that people of African descent are better. It's simply a step in a new or different direction. So God has made the earth to be replenished with wildlife and vegetation. He set the dark from the night. He's created the sun and the moon. And now he's devised to make mankind, not a man, but men, in his likeness and image. This means that he's given them a place to not only rule, but to practice their creation abilities. He formed them out of the earth, and the same name Adam is descriptive in every sense. In Hebrew, this word means mankind, it means earth, and it means red, describing the color of the earth. And conversely, it would also describe the color of mankind. These first men must have been the color of the people who are African descent. First, anthropological science has uncovered that the African man is the oldest and that migration began from Africa. Secondly, geological science has confirmed that the dark races of men far outnumber the white race. And thirdly, just for fun, it doesn't matter what field, yard, or plot that you dig into, the soil is going to be anywhere from light brown to black. So Adam was not a man, but men. The story does become singular when it speaks of a man who conceived children with his wife. The first official names in the Bible being Cain and Abel, the first sibling rivalry. The point to be made is that the first man was who this world calls the black man. The scripture tells us that these men were evil in things that they did. And as a side note, the scripture tells us that God promised that the lifespan of a godless person would become 120 years. And in life science, they've discovered that the human body is designed to live 120 years. Again, I digress. The Bible tells us about angels producing children with the daughters of mankind, who are giants and some just plain evil and tyrannical. But then it tells us a story about a righteous man, a man named Noah, who is described in the book of Enoch as having white skin. His story is one that Genesis barely covers as it takes us into the great flood and the sons of Noah. But I would like for you to hear what the book of Enoch says about Noah before moving on.
Chapter 105. After a time, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech. She became pregnant by him, and brought forth a child, the flesh of which was as white as snow, and red as a rose, the hair of whose head was white like wool, and long, and whose rays of the sun, and when he opened them he illuminated the whole house. When also he was taken from the hand of the midwife, he opened his mouth, and blessed the Lord of heaven. His father Lamech feared, and fled to me, believing not that the child belonged to him, but that he resembled the angels of heaven. And behold, I am come to thee, that thou mightest point out to me the truth. Then I, Enoch, answered and said, The Lord will effect a new thing upon the earth. This have I explained, and seen in a vision. I have shown thee that in the generations of Jared my father, those who were from heaven disregarded the word of the Lord. Behold, they committed crimes, laid aside their class, and intermingled with women. With them also they transgressed, married with them, and begot children. This child which is born to you shall survive on the earth, and his 3 sons shall be saved with him. When all mankind who are on earth shall die, he shall be safe. And his posterity shall beget on the earth giants, not spiritual, but carnal. Upon the earth shall a great punishment be inflicted, and it shall be washed from all corruption. Now therefore inform thy son Lamech, that he who is born is his child in truth, and he shall call his name Noah, for he shall be to you a survivor. He and his children shall be saved from the corruption which shall take place in the world, from all the sin and from all the iniquity which shall be consummated on earth in his days. Afterwards shall greater impiety take place than that which had been before consummated on the earth, for I am acquainted with holy mysteries, which the Lord himself has discovered and explained to me, and which I have read in the tablets of heaven. In them I saw it written, that generation after generation shall transgress, until a righteous race shall arise, until transgression and crime perish from off the earth, until all goodness come upon it. And now, my son, go tell thy son Lamech, that the child which is born is his child in truth, and that there is no deception.
So Noah was what we call albino. According to Enoch, whose book was removed from the Bible, he didn't look like mankind, having white skin. It also says he had light eyes. Both of these traits are confirmed by geneticists to be recessive. The people who the world calls white today are not albino, but because we all have a patriarch who had recessive genes, they naturally obtained and maintained some of those genes. So yes, we are one people. And we've failed to realize, if we read the Bible, how the sons of Noah accurately settled. Sure, we have read key words and names in the scriptures that make us automatically see blacks, but never do we see the possibility that we could have been distinct in our characteristics from the beginning. Over the hundreds and thousands of years of our existence, we've lived and migrated and formed alliances, only to find ourselves in a place where we are now. The first son mentioned is Japheth. The Bible calls his descendants the Gentiles, and everywhere that this term is mentioned, it is referring to the descendants of Japheth. The term Caucasian was started by a German philosopher in 1785. Shortly thereafter, it was guessed that they must have been the original man. There was no scientific proof other than the fact that they had the whitest skin of the people who lived in the Caucasus mountain region. This in itself proves that no quote-unquote white man wrote the Bible. In fact, the nation that portrays itself as Jews is mentioned as being a Gentile son, that son being Ashkenaz. Studies have been published that have confirmed through genetics that they are clearly European. They're not Shemites. Now, I theorize that many of them have had Shemites in their family, as Hebrews did reside in Europe for quite some time. But in 1492, they were exiled from Spain and Europe. It's written in numerous books that Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand condemned the entire Hebrew race to slavery by passing a law. Neither were they allowed to settle the New World. Ironically, the majority of them were taken by ship to Africa after being stripped of all their silver, gold, and for some, any children under the age of 7. So the Jewish who owned slave ships were not Hebrews, they were Gentiles. The next son named is Ham. A lot of people believe that the Africans are descendants of Ham, but according to the scriptures, this cannot be correct, because every land that's listed as inhabited by them, with the exception of Egypt, is Middle Eastern. But to mention Egypt, their settlement makes sense when you factor in that Egypt is divided by the Nile River. This river is 3 times the size of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which explains why Joshua told the Hebrews in Joshua 24:2, "Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham, and the father of Nachor, and they served other gods." As I also just stated, the Hamites settled the areas around the Tigris and Euphrates. So this flood, meaning river, cannot be the Euphrates. But to stay on topic, there's another son mentioned who many theologians and historians try to assert in the Hebrew story, his name being Asher, who is the son of Nimrod, from whom we get Assyria, and the land of his father, the mighty hunter. Esau, the son of Isaac, took his wives from the women of Ham, specifically of the Canaanites. This is where the Edomites come from. I also want to mention that Sephardic Jews are descendants of these Assyrian children, as Sepharad was a region in Assyria. The name Sepharad translates from Hebrew into the name Spain. Whether the Spaniards of today had their roots in Assyria, I don't know, but their people certainly resemble the Iranians. Also, if you review the pictures of the gypsies, so to speak, from Spain, they look like the reliefs of the ancient Assyrians. One distinct characteristic of Hamites in the Bible, as well as today, is their worship of cattle. This is likely why Israel erected the golden calf in the wilderness, as they would have learned this style of worship from the Egyptians. One of the Egyptian deities was a bull they worshipped named Apis, who became associated with Osiris. Now the last son mentioned as the oldest is Shem, and by default we know the land which belonged to him. However, because it's never been discussed in our time, we never think that the Africans could be the sons of Shem. I'm sure this isn't the first time that the idea has surfaced, because I've read numerous books giving accounts of the Jews in Spain, London, and the whole of Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries, and there's always the idea that those Jews were of Negro origin, although they were light-skinned but very rarely white. Sticking with the Bible theme though, I'd like to note that although it's very hard to pinpoint the settlements distinctly, there are a few points that are telling. First, when naming the sons of Shem, the Bible names Peleg as the oldest son of Eber, and it says that in his days the earth was divided. Those who are scholarly say that the division was the separation of nations, but the original text is distinct in using the word for earth as a mass instead of the name Adam to talk about the ground. So Peleg and the Hebrews likely lived in the region that is now known as West Africa. At one point in history, this entire region was known as Ethiopia, and the South Atlantic was the Ethiopic Sea. We also know that the Queen of Sheba, Sheba being a son of Eber, took a trip to see King Solomon in his time of rule. Also, when you read the Bible, most every time you read the English word Mesopotamia, it has been translated from the Hebrew Aram Naharaim, which means the land between two rivers. There's also the land of Padan Aram, which is named in scripture as well, and we know that Aram was also a son of Shem. And only for reference and nothing more, Boko Haram, the terrorist organization in Africa, has its originalization in Niger. While we're speaking about Aram, we know that Job was likely a descendant of his, because he was the descendant or lived in the area of Uz, being from that land. And how does he describe his skin in Job 30:30? Black like midnight, and his bones, or contextually, his flesh was dry from the scorching heat. The Egyptian religion known to us as Egyptology has many similarities to the Christian faith, and many of our people believe that these similarities prove that the Bible is a copy. I would not disagree, because where Christianity has a 10% tithe, the Pharaoh had a 5% tithe. The Bible lists the 10 Commandments, and Egyptology had the 42 laws of Ma'at. The Egyptians worshiped the sun, and Christians worship the Son, S-O-N. The Christian faith has a 3-entity Godhead, and so does the Egyptian teaching. But if you really read the Bible and realize that the Hebrew people were entered into a curse which Moses expounded on before his death, before coming out of Egypt, there was no law. So it's apparent to me that God was familiarizing the Hebrews with his greatness in a place of pharaohs. He was drawing them out of idol worship again. Now, today we know that just below Egypt there's a country known as Ethiopia, and it's in this single African country that the world, even the church, looks to find Jews. But why would they only be in this tiny country? If you've been on the same quest with me, you know that in West Africa, there are Igbo tribes who are being identified as Jewish. And in Southern Africa, there are the Lemba people who are also being recognized. But did you know that at one point in history, Africa wasn't subdivided into as many countries as we see on a current map? West Africa was known as Negritia, or Negro land. And prior to that, it was known as Ethiopia, the entire land. They weren't naked savages, they were sophisticated kingdoms and settlements. So the Hebrews were the Ethiopian, or who the world now calls the Negro. Slavery taught the world that the Africans of West Africa were not social, but these are a few of the people. We see princes, we see a servant, probably to pay a debt, similar to how the scriptures remind the Hebrews that they could hire their own into servitude, but after 7 years they could be redeemed. We see warriors, but most importantly, we see townships. We see developed land. There is peace and calm in each of these pictures. When I used to think of the countryside of Africa during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, I envisioned poor shanty towns. But viewing these pictures from the 19th century, it's clear that our people were sophisticated and just as resourceful. There's even a picture of a group of engineers building a bridge without heavy machinery. If you look through the trees, you can even see a house. You can tell that there is Jewish garb and Mohammedan dress, but you don't see any Europeans, and you don't see war. So what route did Abram, Sarai, Lot, and their crew take to get to Canaan? It's the route that was across the Bab el-Mandeb, through modern-day Yemen. This is likely the route Moses also sought in Exodus 13:17, knowing that the Philistines would make war if they had gone north. Okay, for those of you who may be thinking that I've gone too far with this theory, let's read what the Bible Dictionary says about Ham via BibleTraining.org. The youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races, not the blacks, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. There's yet confusion because we know that all Africans are Ethiopians per previous discussion. Are you willing to change your mind yet? Maybe not, because scholars say that the Hebrew has his origin around the Tigris and Euphrates Valley. But why would the Most High not explain in the scripture that there were 2 nations of people established in one general location. If it had been written by men, they certainly would have stated it in the scripture. But because of the man's cunning, he changed the translation of a few words to change the perspective of the demographic. Are you still not convinced? Well, why would the Most High tell Abram to get from his kindred, but give him a land around his kindred, who would have been in the land where the children of Ham lived? Or why would God have to show Abram the Canaanite if they already inhabited the same land? There's a story in Genesis 14 where the sons of Japheth and the sons of Ham went to war, and it names the kings of the nations as well as the kings of the Hamites in verses 1 through 3. Those verses read, "And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Ariak, king of Elasar, Shedliamar, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemebar, king of Zobaim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea." Now the nations spoken of here are the Gentile nations, or they are the descendants of Japheth. And after the Hamites were defeated in Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot was taken as a possession. Now, if he had looked like the Hamite people, he would have been killed with the others. But instead, he was taken because he looked like a servant. Further down, there's a statement of distinction made to separate Abram from the people of the land. Now, these points, along with Genesis 15:18, brings the current Hebrew philosophy of the scholarly into question, because God promises Abram that he would be given the land of all the Hamites, from the Nile River to the Euphrates. So their origin could not have been in this area, because it would have been mentioned somewhere throughout the scripture. So in conclusion, Padan Aram, or the tableland of Aram, is near modern-day Niger, based on the fact that we now know that the blacks or Negroes are not descendant from Ham or Japheth. It only makes logical sense. This Padan Aram is where Abraham sent his servant to get Isaac a wife, people of their similitude. In fact, Isaac and Rebekah sent Jacob to the same land to get his wife. And the scripture says in Genesis 27:46 that Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth, such as these of the daughters of this land, what good will my life do me?" She was concerned because she knew that if both of her sons married what we call white women, the less and less her descendants would look like her, making her life of no point in that land or reducing her legacy. She wasn't racist, she just wanted to preserve her bloodline. So Jacob went to Padan Aram and looked for his uncle Laban. Now the scriptures don't tell us much about Laban and how he looked, but his name means white. So it can be assumed that he was of a lighter skin. But what is even more telling is the fact that his oldest daughter was tender-eyed, which also can be translated tender-colored, which is why Jacob was upset when he was tricked into marrying her. His mother didn't want white-complexioned grandchildren, so he wanted to please his mama. And when their son Joseph was in Egypt, the queen distinguished him as a Hebrew. So there had to be some marked difference between the sons of Ham and the Hebrews, considering that the Egyptian style of dress was worn all over the land. Now, further along in the story, Jacob reminds his son Joseph of the death of his mother, and he explained that they had made it from Padan, but she died in the land of Canaan. From his description of his travels, their route was northerly, being that they passed through Mount Seir prior to making it into Canaan, along the route to Bethlehem. And after enjoying a great life in Egypt for approximately 93 years, Joseph died, and after his brothers and their kids died, Israel's oppression began. It lasted for nearly 215 years. So that would mean that there were 215 good years prior. Historians try to make the claim that the Hebrews never were in Egypt, so they dismiss the Bible altogether. But there are many who believe that the Hebrew living in Egypt correlates with the dates of Egypt's 18th dynasty. It's been theorized that Thutmose II was the pharaoh of the Exodus, based on the dates between the Exodus and the reign of King Solomon, which is also supported by the fact that his wife and sister began to reign after his untimely demise, because his second oldest son wasn't old enough to reign at that time. There is actually a mention of an older son, but no mention of how he died. Also, it's been scientifically proven by machine testing that their mummies, his mummy, his wife's mummy, Hatshepsut, and his son Thutmose III, all have scarring over their bodies that were possibly caused by the plague of boils in the Exodus story. They all would have lived during that time. The scripture tells us that Israel came out of Egypt after living in the land for 430 years. But was this the 400 years of oppression that God was talking about in Genesis 15? Did the Most High God really want you to believe that the Amorites and the Egyptians were the same people when he named the Amorites as the oppressors? Mitzrayim was a direct descendant of Ham, whereas the Amorites are the children of Canaan, who was the brother of Mitzrayim. Did he mean to mix these people because they were brothers? This Hebrew story is not over. In fact, this theory will continue. See you next time.